understanding, that that person will be a rare one, a person of most remarkable achievement. Such a person will be able to awaken pure faith because they have ceased to cherish any arbitrary notions of their own selfhood, other selves, living beings, or a universal self. Why? Because if they continue to hold on to arbitrary conceptions as to their own selfhood, they will be holding on to something that is non-existent. It is the same with all arbitrary conceptions of other selves, living beings, or a universal self. These are all expressions of non-existent things. Buddhas are Buddhas because they have been able to discard all arbitrary conceptions of form and phenomena. They have transcended all perceptions and have penetrated the illusion of all forms. The Buddha replied, "So it is, Subhuti. Most wonderfully blessed will be those beings who on hearing this sutra will not tremble, nor be frightened or terrified in any way. And why? The Buddha has taught this sutra as the highest perfection, and what the Buddha teaches as the highest perfection, that also the innumerable blessed Buddhas do teach. Therefore it is called the highest perfection." Subhuti, when I talk about the practice of transcendent patience, I do not hold on to any arbitrary conceptions about the phenomena of patience. I merely refer to it as the practice of transcendent patience. And why is that? Because when, thousands of lifetimes ago, the Prince of Kalinga severed the flesh from my limbs and my body, I had no perception of a self, a being, a soul, or a universal self. If I had cherished any of these arbitrary notions at the time my limbs were being torn away, I would have fallen into anger and hatred. I also remember, Subhuti, that during my 500 previous lives, I had used life after life to practice patience and to look upon my life humbly, as though I were a saint called upon to suffer humility. Even then my mind was free of arbitrary conceptions of the phenomena of myself, a being, a soul, or a universal self. Therefore, Subhuti, disciples should leave behind all distinctions of phenomena and awaken the thought of the attainment of supreme enlightenment. A disciple should do this by not allowing their mind to depend upon ideas evoked by the world of the senses, by not allowing their mind to depend upon ideas stirred by sounds, odours, flavours, sensory touch, or any other qualities. The disciple's mind should be kept independent of any thought that might arise within it. If the disciple's mind depends upon anything in the sensory realm, it will have no solid foundation in any reality. This is why Buddha teaches that the mind of a disciple should not accept the appearances of things as a basis when exercising charity. Subhuti, as disciples practice compassion and charity for the welfare of all living beings, they should do it without relying on appearances and without attachment. Just as the Buddha declares that form is not form, so he also declares that all living beings are, in fact, not living beings. Chapter 15. Subhuti, if on the one hand a son or daughter of a good family gives up his or her life in the morning, as many times as there are grains of sand in the Ganges River as an act of generosity, and gives as many again in the afternoon, and as many again in the evening, and continues doing so for countless ages, and if, on the other hand, another person listens to this sutra with complete confidence and without contention, that person's happiness will be far greater. But the happiness of one who writes this sutra down, receives, recites, and explains it to others cannot even be compared. It is so great. Subhuti, we can summarize by saying that the merit and virtue of this sutra is inconceivable, incalculable, and boundless. The Buddha has declared this teaching for the benefit of initiates on the path to enlightenment. He has declared it for the benefit of initiates on the path to nirvana. If there is someone capable of receiving, practicing, reciting, and sharing this sutra with others, the Buddha will see and know that person, and he or she will receive immeasurable, incalculable, and boundless merit and virtue. Such a person is known to be carrying the supreme enlightenment attained by the Buddha. Why? Subhuti. If a person is satisfied with lesser teachings than those I present here, if he or she is still caught up in the idea of a self, a person, a living being, or a universal self, then that person would not be able to listen to, receive, recite, or explain this sutra to others. Subhuti, wherever this sutra shall be observed, studied, and explained, that place will become sacred ground, to which countless spiritually advanced beings will bring offerings. Such places, however humble they may be, will be revered as though they were famous temples, and countless pilgrims will come there to worship. Such a place is a shrine, and should be venerated with formal ceremonies and offerings of flowers and incense. That is the power of this sutra. Chapter 16. Furthermore, Subhuti, if a good man or woman who accepts, upholds, reads or recites this sutra is disdained or slandered, if they are despised or insulted, it means that in prior lives they committed evil acts and as a result are now suffering the fruits of their actions. When their prior life's evil acts have finally been dissolved and extinguished, he or she will attain the supreme clarity of the most fulfilled and awakened mind. Subhuti, in ancient times before I met Dipankara Buddha, I had made offerings to and had been attendant of all 84,000 million Buddhas. If someone is able to receive, recite, study and practice this sutra in a later, more distant age, then the happiness and merit brought about by this virtuous act would be hundreds of thousands of times greater than that which I brought about by my service to the Buddhas in ancient times. In fact, such happiness and merit cannot be conceived or compared with anything, even mathematically. If I were to explain all of this in detail now, some people might become suspicious and disbelieving, and their minds may even become disoriented or confused. Subhuti, you should know that the meaning of this sutra is beyond conception and discussion. Likewise, the fruit resulting from receiving and practicing this sutra is beyond conception and discussion. Chapter 17. At that time, the Venerable Subhuti then asked the Buddha, "World-honored one, may I ask you a question again? If sons or daughters of a good family want to develop the highest, most fulfilled and awakened mind, if they wish to attain the highest perfect wisdom, what should they do to help quiet their drifting minds and master their thinking?" The Buddha replied, "Subhuti, a good son or daughter who wants to give rise to the highest, most fulfilled and awakened mind must create this resolved attitude of mind. I must help to lead all beings to the shore of awakening. But after these beings have become liberated, in truth I know that not even a single being has been liberated. Why is this so? If a disciple cherishes the idea of a self, a person, a living being or a universal self, then that person is not an authentic disciple. Why? Because in fact there is no independently existing object of mind called the highest, most fulfilled and awakened mind. What do you think, Subhuti? In ancient times, when the Buddha was living with Dipankara Buddha, did he attain anything called the highest, most fulfilled and awakened mind? No, most honored one. According to what I understand from the teachings of the Buddha, there is no attaining of anything called the highest, most fulfilled and awakened mind. The Buddha said, "You are correct, Subhuti. In fact, there does not exist any so-called highest, most fulfilled and awakened mind that the Buddha attains. Because if there had been any such thing, Dipankara Buddha would not have predicted of me, in the future you will come to be a Buddha known as the Most Honored One. This prediction was made because there is, in fact, nothing to be attained. Someone would would be mistaken to say that the Buddha has attained the highest, most fulfilled and awakened mind, because there is no such thing as a highest, most fulfilled or awakened mind to be attained. Subhuti, a comparison can be made with the idea of a large human body. What would you understand me to mean if I spoke of a large human body? I would understand that the Lord Buddha was speaking of a large human body, not as an arbitrary conception of its being, but as a series of words only. I would understand that the words carried merely an imaginary meaning. When the Buddha speaks of a large human body, he uses the words only as words. Subhuti, it is just the same when a disciple speaks of liberating numberless sentient beings. If they have in mind any arbitrary conception of sentient beings or of definite numbers, then they are unworthy of being called a disciple. Subhuti, my teachings reveal that even such a thing as is called a disciple is non-existent. Furthermore, there is really nothing for a disciple to live. A true disciple knows that there is no such thing as self, a person, a living being, or a universal self. The true disciple knows that all things are devoid of selfhood, devoid of any separate individuality. To make this teaching even more emphatic, the Lord Buddha continued, if a disciple were to speak as followed, I have to create a serene and beautiful Buddha field. That person is not yet truly a disciple. Why? What the Buddha calls a serene and beautiful Buddha field is not, in fact, a serene and beautiful Buddha field, and that is why it is called a serene and beautiful Buddha field. Subhuti, only a disciple who is wholly devoid of any conception of separate selfhood is worthy of being called a disciple. Chapter 18. The Buddha then asks Subhuti, what do you think? Does the Buddha have human eyes? Subhuti replied, yes, he has human eyes. Does he have the eyes of enlightenment? Of course, the Buddha has the eyes of enlightenment, otherwise he would not be the Buddha. Does the Buddha have the eyes of transcendent intelligence? Yes, the Buddha has the eyes of transcendent intelligence. Does the Buddha have the eyes of spiritual intuition? Yes, Lord, the Buddha has the eyes of spiritual intuition. Does the Buddha have the eyes of love and compassion for all sentient beings? Subhuti agreed and said, Lord, you love all sentient life. What do you think, Subhuti? When I referred to the grains of sand in the river Ganges, did I assert that they were truly grains of sand? No, blessed Lord, you only spoke of them as grains of sand. Subhuti, if there were as many Ganges rivers as there are grains of sand in the river Ganges, and if there were as many Buddha lands as there are grains of sand in all those innumerable rivers, would these Buddha lands be considered numerous? Very numerous indeed, Lord Buddha. Subhuti, I know the mind of every sentient being in all the host of universes, regardless of any modes of thought, conceptions or tendencies. For all modes, conceptions, and tendencies of thoughts are not mind, and yet they are called mind. Why? It is impossible to retain a past thought, to seize a future thought, and even to hold on to a present thought. Chapter 19. The Buddha continued, what do you think, Subhuti? If a follower were to give away enough treasures to fill 3,000 universes, would a great blessing and merit occur to him or her? Subhuti replied, Honored one, such a follower would acquire considerable blessings and merit. The Lord Buddha said, Subhuti, if such a blessing had any substantiality, if it were anything other than a figure of speech, the most honored one would not have used the words blessings and merit. Chapter 20. Subhuti, what do you think? Should one look for Buddha in his perfect physical body? No, perfectly enlightened one. One should not look for Buddha in his perfect physical body. Why? The Buddha, has said that the perfect physical body is not the perfect physical body. Therefore, it is called the perfect physical body. Subhuti, what do you think? Should one look for Buddha in all his perfect appearances? No, most honored one. One should not look for Buddha in all his perfect appearances. Why? The Buddha has said, perfect appearances are not perfect appearances. Therefore, they are called perfect appearances. Chapter 21. Subhuti, do not maintain that the Buddha has this thought. I have spoken spiritual truths. Do not think that way. Why? If someone says the Buddha has spoken spiritual truths, he slanders the Buddha due to his inability to understand what the Buddha teaches. Subhuti, as to speaking truth, no truth can be spoken. Therefore, it is called speaking truth. At that time, Subhuti, the wise elder, addressed the Buddha. Most honored one, will there be living beings in the future who believe this sutra when they hear it? The Buddha said, the living beings to whom you refer are neither living beings nor not living beings. Why, Subhuti? All the different kinds of living beings the Buddha speaks of are not living beings, but they are referred to as living beings. Chapter 22. Subhuti again asked, Blessed Lord, when you attained complete enlightenment, did you feel in your mind that nothing had been acquired? The Buddha replied, that is it exactly, Subhuti. When I attained total enlightenment, I did not feel, as the mind feels, any arbitrary conception of spiritual truth, not even the slightest. Even the words total enlightenment are mere words. They are used merely as a figure of speech. Chapter 23. Furthermore, Subhuti, what I have attained in total enlightenment is the same as what all others have attained. It is undifferentiated, regarded neither as a high state nor a low state. It is wholly independent of any definite or arbitrary conceptions of an individual self, other selves, living beings, or a universal self. Subhuti, when someone is selflessly charitable, they should also practice being ethical by remembering that there is no distinction between oneself and the selfhood of others. Thus, one practices charity by giving not only gifts, but through kindness and sympathy. Practice kindness and charity without attachment, and you can become fully enlightened. Subhuti, what I just said about kindness does not mean that when someone is being charitable, they should hold on to arbitrary conceptions about kindness, for kindness is, after all, only a word, and charity needs to be spontaneous and selfless, done without regard for appearances. Chapter 24. The Buddha continued, Subhuti, if a person collected treasures as high as 3,000 of the highest mountains and gave them all to others, their merit would be less than what would accrue to another person who simply observed and studied this sutra and, out of kindness, explained it to others. The latter person would accumulate hundreds of times the merit, hundreds of thousands of millions of times the merit. There is no conceivable comparison. Chapter 25. Subhuti, do not say that the Buddha has the idea, I will lead all sentient beings into nirvana. Do not think that way, Subhuti. Why? In truth, there is not one single being for the Buddha to lead to enlightenment. If the Buddha were to think that there was, he would be caught in the idea of a self, a person, a living being, or a universal self. Subhuti, what the Buddha calls a self essentially has no self in the way that ordinary persons think there is a self. Subhuti, the Buddha does not regard anyone as an ordinary person. That is why he can speak of them as ordinary persons. Chapter 26. Then the Buddha inquired of Subhuti, what do you think, Subhuti? Is it possible to recognize the Buddha by the 32 physical marks? Subhuti replied, yes, most honored one. The Buddha may thus be recognized. Subhuti, if that were true, then Chakravartin, the mythological king who also had the 32 marks, would be called a Buddha. Then Subhuti, realizing his error, said, most honored one, now I realize that the Buddha cannot be recognized merely by his 32 physical marks of excellence. The Buddha said then, should anyone looking at an image or likeness of the Buddha claim to know the Buddha and worship him, that person would be mistaken, not knowing the true Buddha. Chapter 27. However, Subhuti, if you think that the Buddha realizes the highest, most fulfilled and awakened mind, and does not need to have all the marks, you are mistaken. Subhuti, do not think in that way. Do not think that when one gives rise to the highest, most fulfilled and awakened mind, one needs to see all objects of mind as non-existent, cut off from life. Please do not think in that way. One who gives rise to the highest, most fulfilled and awakened mind does not contend that all objects of mind are non-existent and cut off from life. That is not what I say. Chapter 28. The Lord Buddha continued, Subhuti, if someone gives treasures equal to the number of sands on the shores of the Ganges River, and if another, having realized the egolessness of all things, thereby understands selflessness, the latter would be more blessed than the one who practiced external charity. Why? Because great disciples do not see blessings and merit as a private possession, as something to be gained. Subhuti inquired of the Lord Buddha, what do you mean great disciples do not see blessings and merit as a private possession? The Buddha replied, because those blessings and merit have never been sought after by those great disciples. They do not see them as private possessions, but they see them as the common possession of all beings. Chapter 29. The Buddha said, Subhuti, if any person were to say that the Buddha is now coming or going, or sitting up or lying down, they would not have understood the principle I have been teaching. Why? Because while the expression Buddha means he who has thus come, thus gone, the true Buddha is never coming from anywhere or going anywhere. The name Buddha is merely an expression, a figure of speech. Chapter 30. The Lord Buddha resumed, Subhuti, if any good person, either man or woman, were to take 3,000 galaxies and grind them into microscopic powder and blow it into space, what do you think? Would this powder have any individual existence? Subhuti replied, yes, Lord, as a microscopic powder blown into space, it might be said to have a relative existence. But as you use words, it has no existence. The words are used only as a figure of speech. Otherwise, the words would imply a belief in the existence of matter as an independent and self-existent thing, which it is not. Furthermore, when the Most Honored One refers to the 3,000 galaxies, he could only do so as a figure of speech. Why? Because if the 3,000 galaxies really existed, their only reality would consist in their cosmic unity. Whether as microscopic powder or as galaxies, what does it matter? Only in the sense of the cosmic unity of ultimate being can the Buddha rightfully refer to it. The Lord Buddha was very pleased with this reply and said, Subhuti, although ordinary people have always grasped after an arbitrary conception of matter and galaxies, that concept has no true basis. It is an illusion of the mortal mind. Even when it is referred to as cosmic unity, it is unthinkable and unknowable. Chapter 31. The Lord Buddha continued, if any person were to say that the Buddha in his teachings has constantly referred to himself, to other selves, to living beings, or to a universal self, what do you think? Would that person have understood my meaning? Subhuti replied, "No, blessed Lord, that person would not have understood the meaning of your teachings, for when you refer to those things, you are not referring to their actual existence. You only use the words as figures of speech, as symbols. Only in that sense can words be used, for conceptions, ideas, limited truths, and spiritual truths have no more reality than have matter or phenomena." Then the Lord Buddha made his meaning even more emphatic by saying, "Subhuti, when people begin their practice of seeking to attaining total enlightenment, they ought to see, to perceive, to know, to understand, and to realize that all things and all spiritual truths are no things, and therefore they ought not to conceive within their minds any arbitrary conceptions whatsoever." Chapter 32. Buddha continued, "Subhuti, if anyone gave to the Buddha an immeasurable quantity of the 7 treasures sufficient to fill the whole universe, and if another person, whether a man or woman, in seeking to attain complete enlightenment, were to earnestly and faithfully observe and study even a single section of this sutra and explain it to others, the accumulated blessing and merit of that latter person would be far greater. Subhuti, how can one explain this sutra to others without holding in mind any arbitrary conception of forms or phenomena or spiritual truths? It can only be done, Subhuti, by keeping the mind in perfect tranquility and free from any attachment to appearances. So I say to you, this is how to contemplate our conditioned existence in this fleeting world. Like a tiny drop of dew, or a bubble floating in a stream, like a flash of lightning in a summer cloud, or a flickering lamp, an illusion, a phantom, or a dream, so is all conditioned existence to be seen." Thus spoke Buddha.
Hey, it's me, your skin. Help me maintain my moisture balance with CeraVe Hydrating Cleanser.
The Dharmapada. Chapter 1. The Twin Verses. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. It is founded on our thoughts. It is made up of our thoughts. If a man speaks or acts with an evil thought, pain follows him, as the wheels follow the foot of the ox that draws the carriage. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. It is founded on our thoughts. It is made up of our thoughts. If a man speaks or acts with a pure thought, happiness follows him, like a shadow that never leaves him. He abused me, he beat me, he defeated me, he robbed me. those who harbor such thoughts, hatred will never cease. He abused me, he beat me, he defeated me, he robbed me. In those who do not harbor such thoughts, hatred will cease. For hatred does not cease by hatred at any time. Hatred ceases by love. This is an old rule. The world does not know that we must all come to an end here. But those who know it, their quarrels cease at once. He who lives looking for pleasures only, his senses uncontrolled, immoderate in his food, idle and weak, Mara, the tempter, will certainly overthrow him, as the wind throws down a weak tree. He who lives without looking for pleasures, his senses well controlled, moderate in his food, faithful and strong, him Mara will certainly not overthrow, any more than the wind throws down a rocky mountain. He who wishes to put on the yellow dress without having cleansed himself from sin, who disregards temperance and truth, is unworthy of the yellow dress. But he who has cleansed himself from sin, is well grounded in all virtues, and regards also temperance and truth, he is indeed worthy of the yellow dress. They who imagine truth in untruth, and see untruth in truth, never arrive at truth, but follow vain desires. They who know truth in truth, and untruth in untruth, arrive at truth, and follow true desires. As rain breaks through an ill-thatched house, passion will break through an unreflecting mind. As rain does not break through a well-thatched house, passion will not break through a well-reflecting mind. The evildoer mourns in this world, and he mourns in the next. He mourns in both. He mourns and suffers when he sees the evil of his own work. The virtuous man delights in this world, and he delights in the next. He delights in both. He delights and rejoices when he sees the purity of his own work. The evildoer suffers in this world, and he suffers in the next. He suffers in both. He suffers when he thinks of the evil he has done. He suffers more when going on the evil path. The virtuous man is happy in this world, and he is happy in the next. He is happy in both. He is happy when he thinks of the good he has done. He is still more happy when going on the good path. The thoughtless man, even if he can recite a large portion of the law, but is not a doer of it, has no share in the priesthood, but is like a cowherd counting the cows of others. The follower of the law, even if he can recite only a small portion of it, but having forsaken passion and hatred and foolishness, possesses true knowledge and serenity of mind, he, caring for nothing in this world or that to come, has indeed a share in the priesthood. Chapter 2. On Earnestness. Earnestness is the path of immortality, nirvana. Thoughtlessness, the path of death. Those who are in earnest do not die. Those who are thoughtless are as if dead already. Those who are advanced in earnestness, having understood this clearly, delight in earnestness and rejoice in the knowledge of the Arias, the elect. These wise people, meditative, steady, always possessed of strong powers, attain to nirvana, the highest happiness. If an earnest person has roused himself, if he is not forgetful, if his deeds are pure, if he acts with consideration, if he restrains himself and lives according to law, then his glory will increase. By rousing himself, by earnestness, by restraint and control, the wise man may make for himself an island which no flood can overwhelm. Fools follow after vanity, men of evil wisdom. The wise man keeps earnestness as his best jewel. Follow not after vanity, nor after the enjoyment of love and lust. He who is earnest and meditative obtains ample joy. When the learned man drives away vanity by earnestness, he, the wise, climbing the terraced heights of wisdom, looks down upon the fools. Serene he looks upon the toiling crowd. as one that stands on a mountain looks down upon them that stand upon the plain. Earnest among the thoughtless, awake among the sleepers, the wise man advances like a racer, leaving behind the hack. By earnestness did Magavan, Indra, rise to the lordship of the gods. People praise earnestness. Thoughtlessness is always blamed. A bhikshu, mendicant, who delights in earnestness, who looks with fear on thoughtlessness, moves about like fire, burning all his fetters, small or large. A bhikshu, mendicant, who delights in reflection, who looks with fear on thoughtlessness, cannot fall away from his perfect state. He is close upon nirvana. Chapter 3. Thought. As a fletcher makes straight his arrow, a wise man makes straight his trembling and unsteady thought, which is difficult to guard, difficult to hold back. As a fish taken from his watery home and thrown on dry ground, our thought trembles all over in order to escape the dominion of Mara, the tempter. It is good to tame the mind, which is difficult to hold in and flighty, rushing wherever it listeth. A tamed mind brings happiness. Let the wise man guard his thoughts, for they are difficult to perceive, very artful, and they rush wherever they list. Thoughts well guarded bring happiness. Those who bridle their mind, which travels far, moves about alone, is without a body, and hides in the chamber of the heart, will be free from the bonds of Mara, the tempter. If a man's thoughts are unsteady, if he does not know the true law, if his peace of mind is troubled, his knowledge will never be perfect. If a man's thoughts are not dissipated, if his mind is not perplexed, if he has ceased to think of good or evil, then there is no fear for him while he is watchful. Knowing that this body is fragile like a jar, and making this thought firm like a fortress, one should attack Mara the tempter with the weapon of knowledge. One should watch him when conquered, and should never rest. Before long, alas, this body will lie on the earth, despised, without understanding, like a useless log. Whatever a hater may do to a hater, or an enemy to an enemy, a wrongly directed mind will do us greater mischief. Not a mother, not a father will do so much, nor any other relative. A well-directed mind will do us greater service. Chapter 4. Flowers. Who shall overcome this earth, and the world of Yama, the lord of the departed, and the world of the gods? Who shall find out the plainly shown path of virtue, as a clever man finds out the right flower? The disciple will overcome the earth, and the world of Yama, and the world of the gods. The disciple will find the plainly shown path of virtue, as a clever man finds out the right flower. He who knows that this body is like froth, and has learned that it is as unsubstantial as a mirage, will break the flower-pointed arrow of Mara, and never see the king of death. Death carries off a man who is gathering flowers and whose mind is distracted, as a flood carries off a sleeping village. Death subdues a man who is gathering flowers and whose mind is distracted before he is satiated in his pleasures. As the bee collects nectar and departs without injuring the flower or its colour or scent, so let the sage dwell in his village. Not the perversities of others, not their sins of commission or omission, but his own misdeeds and negligences should a sage take notice of. Like a beautiful flower, full of colour but without scent, are the fine but fruitless words of him who does not act accordingly. But like a beautiful flower, full of colour and full of scent, are the fine and fruitful words of him who acts accordingly. As many kinds of wreaths can be made from a heap of flowers, so many good things may be achieved by a mortal when once he is born. The scent of flowers does not travel against the wind, nor that of sandalwood, or of Tagara and Malika flowers, but the odor of good people travels even against the wind. A good man pervades every place. Sandalwood or Tagara, a lotus flower or a Vasiki, among these sorts of perfumes, the perfume of virtue is unsurpassed. Mean is the scent that comes from Tagara and sandalwood. The perfume of those who possess virtue rises up to the gods as the highest. Of the people who possess these virtues, who live without thoughtlessness, and who are emancipated through true knowledge, Mara the tempter never finds the way. As on a heap of rubbish cast upon the highway, the lily will grow full of sweet perfume and delight. Thus the disciple of the truly enlightened Buddha shines forth by his knowledge among those who are like rubbish, among the people that walk in darkness. Chapter 5. The Fool. Long is the night to him who is awake. Long is a mile to him who is tired. Long is life to the foolish who do not know the true law. If a traveller does not meet with one who is his better or his equal, let him firmly keep to his solitary journey. There is no companionship with a fool. These sons belong to me, and this wealth belongs to me. With such thoughts, a fool is tormented. He himself does not belong to himself. How much less sons and wealth? The fool who knows his foolishness is wise at least so far, but a fool who thinks himself wise, he is a fool indeed. If a fool be associated with a wise man, even all his life, he will perceive the truth as little as a spoon perceives the taste of soup. If an intelligent man be associated for 1 minute only with a wise man, he will soon perceive the truth, as the tongue perceives the taste of soup.
So, if you
Fools of little understanding have themselves for their greatest enemies, for they do evil deeds which must bear bitter fruits. That deed is not well done, of which a man must repent, and the reward of which he receives crying and with a tearful face. No, that deed is well done, of which a man does not repent, and the reward of which he receives gladly and cheerfully. As long as the evil deed does not bear fruit, the fool thinks it is like honey, but when it ripens, then the fool suffers grief.
Really sad.
Let a fool, month after month, eat his food like an ascetic, with the tip of a blade of kusa grass. Yet he is not worth the 16th particle of those who have well weighed the law. An evil deed, like newly drawn milk, does not turn suddenly. Smouldering like fire covered by ashes, it follows the fool. And when the evil deed, after it has become known, brings sorrow to the fool, then it destroys his bright lot. Nay, it cleaves his head. Let the fool wish for a false reputation, for precedence among the bhikshus, for lordship in the convents, for worship among other people. May both the layman and he who has left the world think that this is done by me. May they be subject to me in everything which is to be done or is not to be done. Thus is the mind of the fool, and his desire and pride increase. One is the road that leads to wealth, another the road that leads to nirvana. If the bhikshu, the disciple of Buddha, has learnt this, he will not yearn for honor. He will strive after separation from the world. Chapter 6. The Wise Man, or Pandita. If you see an intelligent man who tells you where true treasures are to be found, who shows you what is to be avoided, and administers reproofs, follow that wise man. It will be better, not worse, for those who follow him. Let him admonish, let him teach, let him forbid what is improper. He will be beloved of the good, by the bad he will be hated. Do not have evildoers for friends. Do not have low people for friends. Have virtuous people for friends. Have for friends the best of men. He who drinks in the law lives happily with a serene mind. The sage rejoices always in the law, as preached by the elect, the Arias. Well makers lead the water wherever they like. Fletchers bend the arrow. Carpenters bend a log of wood. Wise people fashion themselves. A solid rock is not shaken by the wind. Wise people falter not amidst blame and praise. Wise people, after they have listened to the laws, become serene, like a deep, smooth, and still lake. Good people walk on whatever befall. The good do not prattle, longing for pleasure. Whether touched by happiness or sorrow, wise people never appear elated or depressed. If, whether for his own sake or for the sake of others, a man wishes neither for a son, nor for wealth, nor for lordship, and if he does not wish for his own success by unfair means, then he is good, wise, and virtuous. Few are there among men who arrive at the other shore, become arhats. The other people here run up and down the shore. But those who, when the law has been well preached to them, follow the law, will pass across the dominion of death, however difficult to overcome. A wise man should leave the dark state of ordinary life and follow the bright state of the bhikshu. After going from his home to a homeless state, he should, in his retirement, look for enjoyment where there seemed to be no enjoyment. Leaving all pleasures behind and calling nothing his own, the wise man should purge himself from all the troubles of the mind. Those whose mind is well grounded in the 7 elements of knowledge, who, without clinging to anything, rejoice in freedom from attachment, whose appetites have been conquered, and who are full of light, are free even in this world. Chapter 7. The Venerable, or Arhat. There is no suffering for him who has finished his journey and abandoned grief, who has freed himself on all sides and thrown off all fetters. They depart with their thoughts well collected. They are not happy in their abode, like swans who have left their lake. They leave their house and home. Men who have no riches, who live on recognized food, who have perceived void and the unconditioned freedom of nirvana, their path is difficult to understand, like that of birds in the air. He whose appetites are stilled, who is not absorbed in enjoyment, who has perceived void and the unconditioned freedom of nirvana, his path is difficult to understand, like that of birds in the air. The gods even envy him whose senses, like horses well broken in by the driver, have been subdued, who is free from pride and free from appetites. Such a one who does his duty is tolerant like the earth, like Indra's bolt. He is like a lake without mud. No new births are in store for him. His thought is quiet. Quiet are his word and deed, when he has obtained freedom by true knowledge, when he has thus become a quiet man. The man who is free from credulity, but knows the uncreated, who has cut all ties, removed all temptations, renounced all desires, he is the greatest of men. In a hamlet or in a forest, or in the deep water or on the dry land, wherever venerable persons, Arhanta, dwell, that place is delightful. Forests are delightful. Where the world finds no delight, there the passionless will find delight, for they look not for pleasures. Chapter 8. The Thousands. Even though a speech be 1,000 words, but made up of senseless words, one word of sense is better, which if a man hears, he becomes quiet. Even though a gatha, poem, be 1,000 words, but made up of senseless words, one word of a gatha is better, which if a man hears, he becomes quiet. Though a man recite 100 gathas, made up of senseless words, one word of the law is better, which if a man hears, he becomes quiet. If one man conquer in battle 1,000 times thousands men, and if another conquer himself, he is the greatest of conquerors. One's own self conquered is better than all other people. Not even a god, a Gandharva, not Mara with Brahman could change into defeat the victory of a man who has vanquished himself and always lives under restraint. If a man for 100 years sacrifice month after month with 1,000, and if he but for one moment pay homage to a man whose soul is grounded in true knowledge, better is that homage than sacrifice for 100 years. If a man for 100 years worship Agni, fire, in the forest, and if he but for one moment pay homage to a man whose soul is grounded in true knowledge, better is that homage than sacrifice for 100 years. Whatever a man sacrifice in this world as an offering or as an oblation for a whole year in order to gain merit, the whole of it is not worth a farthing. Reverence shown to the righteous is better. He who always greets and constantly reveres the aged, 4 things will increase to him: life, beauty, happiness, power. But he who lives 100 years, vicious and unrestrained, a life of one day is better if a man is virtuous and reflecting. And he who lives 100 years, ignorant and unrestrained, a life of one day is better if a man is wise and reflecting. And he who lives 100 years, idle and weak, a life of one day is better if a man has attained firm strength. And he who lives 100 years, not seeing beginning and end, a life of one day is better if a man sees beginning and end. And he who lives 100 years, not seeing the immortal place, a life of one day is better if a man sees the immortal place. And he who lives 100 years, not seeing the highest law, a life of one day is better if a man sees the highest law. Chapter 9. Evil. If a man would hasten towards the good, he should keep his thought away from evil. If a man does what is good slothfully, his mind delights in evil. If a man commits a sin, let him not do it again. Let him not delight in sin. Pain is the outcome of evil. If a man does what is good, let him do it again. Let him delight in it. Happiness is the outcome of good. Even an evildoer sees happiness as long as his evil deed has not ripened. But when his evil deed has ripened, then does the evildoer see evil. Even a good man sees evil days as long as his good deed has not ripened. But when his good deed has ripened, then does the good man see happy days. Let no man think lightly of evil, saying in his heart, "It will not come nigh unto me." Even by the falling of water drops, a water pot is filled. The fool becomes full of evil, even if he gather it little by little. Let no man think lightly of good, saying in his heart, "It will not come nigh unto me." Even by the falling of water drops, a water pot is filled. The wise man becomes full of good, even if he gather it little by little. Let a man avoid evil deeds as a merchant. If he has few companions and carries much wealth, avoids a dangerous road, as a man who loves life avoids poison. He who has no wound on his hand may touch poison with his hand. Poison does not affect one who has no wound, nor is there evil for one who does not commit evil. If a man offend a harmless, pure and innocent person, the evil falls back upon that fool, like light dust thrown up against the wind. Some people are born again. Evildoers go to hell, righteous people go to heaven. Those who are free from all worldly desires attain nirvana. Not in the sky, not in the midst of the sea, not if we enter the clefts of the mountains, is there known a spot in the whole world where a man might be freed from an evil deed. Not in the sky, not in the midst of the sea, not if we enter the clefts of the mountains, is there known a spot in the whole world where death could not overcome the mortal. Chapter 10. Punishment. men tremble at punishment. All men fear death. Remember that you are like unto them, and do not kill, nor cause slaughter. All men tremble at punishment. All men love life. Remember that you are like unto them, and do not kill, nor cause slaughter. He who, seeking his own happiness, punishes or kills beings who also long for happiness, will not find happiness after death. He who, seeking his own happiness, does not punish or kill beings who also long for happiness, will find happiness after death. Do not speak harshly to anybody. Those who are spoken to will answer thee in the same way. Angry speech is painful. Blows for blows will touch thee. If, like a shattered metal gong, you utter not, then you have reached nirvana. Contention is not known to you. As a cowherd with his staff drives his cows into the stable, so do age and death drive the life of men. A fool does not know when he commits his evil deeds, but the wicked man burns by his own deeds, as if burnt by fire. He who inflicts pain on innocent and harmless persons will soon come to one of these 10 states. He will have cruel suffering, loss, injury of the body, heavy affliction or loss of mind, or a misfortune coming from the king, or a fearful accusation, or loss of relations, or destruction of treasures, or lightning fire will burn his houses, and when his body is destroyed, the fool will go to hell. Not nakedness, not plaited hair, not dirt, not fasting or lying on the earth, not rubbing with dust, not sitting motionless, can purify a mortal who has not overcome desires. He who, though dressed in fine apparel, exercises tranquility, is quiet, subdued, restrained, chaste, and has ceased to find fault with all other beings, he indeed is a Brahmana, an ascetic, Sramana, a friar, Bhikshu. Is there in this world any man so restrained by humility that he does not mind reproof, as a well-trained horse the whip? Like a well-trained horse, when touched by the whip, be you active and lively, and by faith, by virtue, by energy, by meditation, by discernment of the law, you will overcome this great pain of reproof, perfect in knowledge and in behavior, and never forgetful. Well-makers lead the water wherever they like. Fletchers bend the arrow. Carpenters bend a log of wood. Good people fashion themselves. Chapter 11. Old Age. How is their laughter? How is their joy? Or is this world always burning? Why do you not seek a light, you who are surrounded by darkness? Look at this dressed-up lump, covered with wounds, joined together, sickly, full of many thoughts, which has no strength, no hold. This body is wasted, full of sickness and frail. This heap of corruption breaks into pieces. Life indeed ends in death. Those white bones, those gourds thrown away in autumn, what pleasure is there in looking at them? After a stronghold has been made of the bones, it is covered with flesh and blood, and there dwell in it old age and death, pride and deceit. The brilliant chariots of kings are destroyed. The body also approaches destruction, but the virtue of good people never approaches destruction. Thus do the good say to the good. Looking for the maker of this tabernacle, I shall have to run through a course of many births, so long as I do not find him, and painful is birth again and again. But now, maker of the tabernacle, you have been seen. You shall not make this tabernacle again. All thy rafters are broken, thy ridgepole is sundered. The mind, approaching the eternal, Visankara, Nirvana, has attained to the extinction of all desires. Men who have not observed proper discipline and have not gained treasure in their youth perish like old herons in a lake without fish. Men who have not observed proper discipline and have not gained treasure in their youth lie like broken bows, sighing after the past. Chapter 12. Self. If a man hold himself dear, let him watch himself carefully. During one at least out of the 3 watches, a wise man should be watchful. Let each man direct himself first to what is proper, then let him teach others. Thus a wise man will not suffer. If a man make himself as he teaches others to be, then, being himself well subdued, he may subdue others. One's own self is indeed difficult to subdue. Self is the lord of self. Who else could be the lord? With self well subdued, a man finds a lord such as few can find. The evil done by oneself, self-begotten, self-bred, crushes the foolish, as a diamond breaks a precious stone. He whose wickedness is very great brings himself down to the state where his enemy wishes him to be, as a creeper does with the tree which it surrounds. Bad deeds and deeds hurtful to ourselves are easy to do. What is beneficial and good, that is very difficult to do. The foolish man who scorns the rule of the venerable, Arahat, of the elect, Arya, of the virtuous, and follows false doctrines, he bears fruits to his own destruction, like the fruits of the Kataka reed. By oneself the evil is done. By oneself one suffers. By oneself evil is left undone. By oneself one is purified. Purity and impurity belong to oneself. No one can purify another. Let no one forget his own duty for the sake of another's, however great. Let a man, after he has discerned his own duty, be always attentive to his duty. Chapter 13. The World. Do not follow the evil law. Do not live on in thoughtlessness. Do not follow false doctrine. Be not a friend of the world. Rouse thyself. Do not be idle. Follow the law of virtue. The virtuous rests in bliss in this world and in the next. Follow the law of virtue. Do not follow that of sin. The virtuous rests in bliss in this world and in the next. Look upon the world as a bubble. Look upon it as a mirage. The king of death does not see him who thus looks down upon the world. Come, look at this glittering world, like unto a royal chariot. The foolish are immersed in it, but the wise do not touch it. He who formerly was reckless and afterwards became sober brightens up this world, like the moon when freed from clouds. He whose evil deeds are covered by good deeds brightens up this world, like the moon when freed from the clouds. This world is dark. Few only can see here. A few only go to heaven, like birds escaped from the net. The swans go on the path of the sun. They go through the ether by means of their miraculous power. The wise are led out of this world when they have conquered Mara and his train. If a man has transgressed one law and speaks lies and scoffs at another world, there is no evil he will not do. The uncharitable do not go to the world of the gods. Fools only do not praise liberality. A wise man rejoices in liberality, and through it becomes blessed in the other world. Better than sovereignty over the earth, better than going to heaven, better than lordship over all worlds, is the reward of the first step in holiness. Chapter 14. The Buddha, the Awakened. He whose conquest is not conquered again, into whose conquest no one in this world enters, by what track can you lead him, the awakened, the omniscient, the trackless? He whom no desire with its snares and poisons can lead astray, by what track can you lead him, the awakened, the omniscient, the trackless? Even the gods envy those who are awakened and not forgetful, who are given to meditation, who are wise and who delight in the repose of retirement from the world. Difficult to obtain is the conception of men, difficult is the life of mortals, difficult is the hearing of the true law, difficult is the birth of the awakened, the attainment of Buddhahood. Not to commit any sin, to do good and to purify one's mind, that is the teaching of all the awakened. The awakened call patience the highest penance, long-suffering the highest nirvana, for he is not an anchorite, pravragita, who strikes others. He is not an ascetic, shramana, who insults others. Not to blame, not to strike, to live restrained under the law, to be moderate in eating, to sleep and sit alone, and to dwell on the highest thoughts. This is the teaching of the awakened. There is no satisfying lusts, even by a shower of gold pieces. He who knows that lusts have a short taste and cause pain, he is wise. Even in heavenly pleasures he finds no satisfaction. The disciple who is fully awakened delights only in the destruction of all desires. Men, driven by fear, go to many a refuge, to mountains and forests, to groves and sacred trees. But that is not a safe refuge. That is not the best refuge. A man is not delivered from all pains after having gone to that refuge. He who takes refuge with Buddha, the law and the church, he who, with clear understanding, sees the four holy truths, pain, the origin of pain, the destruction of pain, and the eightfold holy way that leads to the quieting of pain. That is the safe refuge. That is the best refuge. Having gone to that refuge, a man is delivered from all pain. A supernatural person, a Buddha, is not easily found. He is not born everywhere. Wherever such a sage is born, that race prospers. Happy is the arising of the awakened. Happy is the teaching of the true law. Happy is peace in the church. Happy is the devotion of those who are at peace. He who pays homage to those who deserve homage, whether the awakened Buddha or their disciples, those who have overcome the host of evils and crossed the flood of sorrow, he who pays homage to such as have found deliverance and know no fear, his merit can never be measured by anybody. Chapter 15. Happiness. Let us live happily then, not hating those who hate us. Among men who hate us, let us dwell free from hatred. Let us live happily then, free from ailments among the ailing. Among men who are ailing, let us dwell free from ailments. Let us live happily then, free from greed among the greedy. Among men who are greedy, let us dwell free from greed. Let us live happily then, though we call nothing our own. We shall be like the bright gods, feeding on happiness. Victory breeds hatred, for the conquered is unhappy. He who has given up both victory and defeat, he, the contented, is happy. There is no fire like passion. There is no losing throw like hatred. There is no pain like this body. There is no happiness higher than rest. Hunger is the worst of diseases, the body the greatest of pains. If one knows this truly, that is nirvana, the highest happiness. Health is the greatest of gifts, contentedness the best riches. Trust is the best of relationships, nirvana the highest happiness. He who has tasted the sweetness of solitude and tranquility is free from fear and free from sin, while he tastes the sweetness of drinking in the law. The sight of the elect, Ariya, is good. To live with them is always happiness. If a man does not see fools, he will be truly happy. He who walks in the company of fools suffers a long way. Company with fools, as with an enemy, is always painful. Company with the wise is pleasure, like meeting with kinsfolk. Therefore, one ought to follow the wise, the intelligent, the learned, the much enduring, the dutiful, the elect. One ought to follow a good and wise man, as the moon follows the path of the stars. Chapter 60. Pleasure. He who gives himself to vanity and does not give himself to meditation forgetting the real aim of life and grasping at pleasure, will in time envy him who has exerted himself in meditation. Let no man ever look for what is pleasant or what is unpleasant. Not to see what is pleasant is pain, and it is pain to see what is unpleasant. Let, therefore, no man love anything. Loss of the beloved is evil. Those who love nothing and hate nothing have no fetters. From pleasure comes grief, from pleasure comes fear. He who is free from pleasure knows neither grief nor fear. From affection comes grief, from affection comes fear. He who is free from affection knows neither grief nor fear. From lust comes grief, from lust comes fear. He who is free from lust knows neither grief nor fear. From love comes grief, from love comes fear. He who is free from love knows neither grief nor fear. From greed comes grief, from greed comes fear. He who is free from greed knows neither grief nor fear. He who possesses virtue and intelligence, who is just, who speaks the truth and does what is his own business, him the world will hold dear. He in whom a desire for the ineffable, nirvana, has sprung up, who is satisfied in his mind and whose thoughts are not bewildered by love, he is called Udvram Strotas, carried upwards by the stream. Kinsmen, friends and lovers, salute a man who has been long away and returns safe from afar. In like manner his good works receive him who has done good and has gone from this world to the other, as kinsmen receive a friend on his return. Chapter 17. Anger. Let a man leave anger. Let him forsake pride. Let him overcome all bondage. No sufferings befall the man who is not attached to name and form, and who calls nothing his own. He who holds back rising anger like a rolling chariot, him I call a real driver. Other people are but holding the reins. Let a man overcome anger by love. Let him overcome evil by good. Let him overcome the greedy by liberality, the liar by truth. Speak the truth, do not yield to anger. Give if thou art asked for little. By these 3 steps thou wilt go near the gods. The sages who injure nobody and who always control their body, they will go to the unchangeable place, nirvana, where, if they have gone, they will suffer no more. Those who are ever watchful, who study day and night, and who strive after nirvana, their passions will come to an end. This is an old saying, O Atula. This is not only of today. They blame him who sits silent. They blame him who speaks much. They also blame him who says little. There is no one on earth who is not blamed. There never was, there never will be, nor is there now, a man who is always blamed, or a man who is always praised. But he whom those who discriminate praise continually day after day, as without blemish, wise, rich in knowledge and virtue, who would dare to blame him, like a coin made of gold from the Gambu river. Even the gods praise him. He is praised even by Brahman. Beware bodily anger, and control thy body. Leave the sins of the body, and with thy body practice virtue. Beware of the anger of the tongue, and control thy tongue. Leave the sins of the tongue, and practice virtue with thy tongue. Beware of the anger of the mind, and control thy mind. Leave the sins of the mind, and practice virtue with thy mind. The wise who control their body, who control their tongue, who control their mind, are indeed well controlled. Chapter 18. Impurity. Thou art now like a sear leaf. The messengers of death, Yama, have come near to thee. Thou standest at the door of thy departure, and thou hast no provision for thy journey. Make thyself an island, work hard, be wise. When thy impurities are blown away, and thou art free from guilt, Thou wilt enter into the heavenly world of the elect, Aria. Thy life has come to an end, thou art near to death. There is no resting place for thee on the road, and thou hast no provision for thy journey. Make thyself an island, work hard, be wise. When thy impurities are blown away, and thou art free from guilt, thou wilt not enter again into birth and decay. Let a wise man blow off the impurities of self, as a smith blows off the impurities of silver one by one, little by little, and from time to time. As the impurity which springs from the iron, when it springs from it, destroys it, thus do a transgressor's own works lead him to the evil path. The taint of prayers is non-repetition. The taint of houses, non-repair. The taint of the body is sloth. The taint of a watchman, thoughtlessness. Bad conduct is the taint of woman. Greediness, the taint of a benefactor. Tainted are all evil ways in this world and in the next. But there is a taint worse than all taints. Ignorance is the greatest taint. O mendicants, throw off that taint and become taintless. Life is easy to live for a man who is without shame. A crow hero, a mischief maker, an insulting, bold, and wretched fellow. But life is hard to live for a modest man, who always looks for what is pure, who is disinterested, quiet, spotless, and intelligent. He who destroys life, who speaks untruth, who in this world takes what is not given him, who goes to another man's wife, and the man who gives himself to drinking intoxicating liquors, he, even in this world, digs up his own root. O man, know this, that the unrestrained are in a bad state. Take care that greediness and vice do not bring thee to grief for a long time. The world gives according to their faith or according to their pleasure. If a man frets about the food and the drink given to others, he will find no rest either by day or by night. He in whom that feeling is destroyed and taken out with the very root finds rest by day and by night. There is no fire like passion. There is no shark like hatred. There is no snare like folly. There is no torrent like greed. The fault of others is easily perceived, but that of oneself is difficult to perceive. A man winnows his neighbour's faults like chaff, but his own fault he hides, as a cheat hides the bad die from the gambler. If a man looks after the faults of others and is always inclined to be offended, his own passions will grow, and he is far from the destruction of passions. There is no path through the air. A man is not a samana by outward acts. The world delights in vanity. The Tathagatas, the Buddhas, are free from vanity. There is no path through the air. A man is not a samana by outward acts. No creatures are eternal, but the awakened Buddha are never shaken. Chapter 19. The Just. A man is not just if he carries a matter by violence. No, he who distinguishes both right and wrong, who is learned and leads others not by violence, but by law and equity, and who is guarded by the law and intelligent, he is called just. A man is not learned because he talks much. He who is patient, free from hatred and fear, he is learned. A man is not a supporter of the law because he talks much. Even if a man has learnt little but sees the law bodily, he is a supporter of the law, a man who never neglects the law. A man is not an elder because his head is grey. His age may be ripe, but he is called old in vain. He in whom there is truth, virtue, love, restraint, moderation, he who is free from impurity and is wise, he is called an elder. An envious, greedy, dishonest man does not become respectable by means of much talking only, or by the beauty of his complexion. He in whom all this is destroyed and taken out with the very root, he, when freed from hatred and wise, is called respectable. Not by tonsure does a disciplined man who speaks falsehood become a samana. Can a man be a samana who is still held captive by desire and greediness? He who always quiets the evil, whether small or large, he is called a samana, a quiet man, because he has quieted all evil. A man is not a mendicant, bhikshu, simply because he asks others for alms. He who adopts the whole law is a bhikshu, not he who only begs. He who is above good and evil, who is chaste, who with knowledge passes through the world, he indeed is called a bhikshu. A man is not a muni because he observes silence if he is foolish and ignorant, but the wise who, taking the balance, chooses the good and avoids the evil, he is a muni, and is a muni thereby. He who in this world weighs both sides is called a muni. A man is not an elect, Ariya, because he injures living creatures. Because he has pity on all living creatures, thereby is a man called Ariya. Not only by discipline and vows, not only by much learning, not by entering into a trance, not by sleeping alone, do I earn the happiness of release, which no worldling can know. Bhikshu, be not confident, as long as thou hast not attained the extinction of desires. Chapter 20. The Way. The best of ways is the eightfold. The best of truths is the 4 words. The best of virtues, passionlessness. The best of men, he who has eyes to see. This is the way. There is no other that leads to the purifying of intelligence. Go on this way. Everything else is the deceit of Mara, the tempter. If you go on this way, you will make an end of pain. The way was preached by me when I had understood the removal of the thorns in the flesh. You yourself must make an effort. The Tathagatas, Buddhas, are only preachers. The thoughtful who enter the way are freed from the bondage of Mara. All created things perish. He who knows and sees this becomes passive in pain. This is the way to purity. All created things are grief and pain. He who knows and sees this becomes passive in pain. This is the way that leads to purity. All forms are unreal. He who knows and sees this becomes passive in pain. This is the way that leads to purity. He who does not rouse himself when it is time to rise, who, though young and strong, is full of sloth, whose will and thought are weak, that lazy and idle man will never find the way to knowledge. Watching his speech, well restrained in mind, let a man never commit any wrong with his body. Let a man but keep these 3 roads of action clear, and he will achieve the way which is taught by the wise. Through zeal, knowledge is gotten. Through lack of zeal, knowledge is lost. Let a man who knows this double path of gain and loss thus place himself that knowledge may grow. Cut down the whole forest of lust, not a tree only. Danger comes out of the forest of lust. When you have cut down both the forest and its undergrowth, then, bhikshus, you will be rid of the forest and free. So long as the love of man towards women, even the smallest, is not destroyed, so long is his mind in bondage, as the calf that drinks milk is to its mother. Cut out the love of self like an autumn lotus with thy hand. Cherish the road of peace. Nirvana has been shown by Sugata, Buddha. Here we shall dwell in the rain, here in winter and summer. Thus the fool meditates and does not think of his death. Death comes and carries off that man, prays for his children and flocks, his mind distracted, as a flood carries off a sleeping village. Sons are no help, nor a father, nor relations. There is no help from kinsfolk for one whom death has seized. A wise and good man that knows the meaning of this should quickly clear the way that leads to nirvana. Through zeal, knowledge is gotten. Through lack of zeal, knowledge is lost. Let a man who knows this double path of gain and loss Thus place himself, that knowledge may grow. Cut down the whole forest of lust, not only a tree. Danger comes out of the forest of lust. When you have cut down both the forest and its undergrowth, then, Big Shoes, you will be rid of the forest and free. So long as the love of man towards women, even the smallest, is not destroyed, so long is his mind in bondage, as the calf that drinks milk is to its mother. Cut out the love of self, like an autumn lotus, with thy hand. Cherish the road of peace. Nirvana has been shown by Sugata, Buddha. Chapter 21. Miscellaneous. If by leaving a small pleasure one sees a great pleasure, let a wise man leave the small pleasure and look to the great. He who, by causing pain to others, wishes to obtain pleasure for himself, he, entangled in the bonds of hatred, will never be free from hatred. What ought to be done is neglected. What ought not to be done is done. The desires of unruly, thoughtless people are always increasing. But they whose whole watchfulness is always directed to their body, who do not follow what ought not to be done, and who steadfastly do what ought to be done, the desires of such watchful and wise people will come to an end. A true Brahmana goes scatheless, though he have killed father and mother and 2 valiant kings, though he has destroyed a kingdom with all its subjects. A true Brahmana goes scatheless, though he have killed father and mother and 2 holy kings and an eminent man besides. The disciples of Gautama are always well awake, and their thoughts day and night are always set on Buddha. The disciples of Gautama are always well awake, and their thoughts day and night are always set on the law. The disciples of Gautama are always well awake, and their thoughts day and night are always set on the church. The disciples of Gautama are always well awake, and their thoughts day and night are always set on their body. The disciples of Gautama are always well awake, and their mind day and night always delights in compassion. The disciples of Gautama are always well awake, and their mind day and night always delights in meditation. It is hard to leave the world, to become a friar. It is hard to enjoy the world. Hard is the monastery. Painful are the houses. Painful it is to dwell with equals, to share everything in common, and the itinerant mendicant is beset with pain. Therefore let no man be an itinerant mendicant, and he will not be beset with pain. Whatever place a faithful, virtuous, celebrated, and wealthy man chooses, there he is respected. Good people shine from afar, like the snowy mountains. Bad people are not seen, like arrows shot at night. He alone who, without ceasing, practices the duty of sitting alone and sleeping alone, he, subduing himself, will rejoice in the destruction of all desires alone, as if living in a forest. Chapter 22. The Downward Course. He who says what is not goes to hell. He also who, having done a thing, says, I have not done it, after death both are equal. They are men with evil deeds in the next world. Many men whose shoulders are covered with the yellow gown are ill-conditioned and unrestrained. Such evildoers, by their evil deeds, go to hell. Better it would be to swallow a heated iron bowl, like flaring fire, than that a bad, unrestrained fellow should live on the charity of the land. 4 things does a reckless man gain who covets his neighbour's wife: a bad reputation, an uncomfortable bed, thirdly punishment, and lastly hell. There is the bad reputation and the evil way to hell. There is the short pleasure of the frightened in the arms of the frightened, and the king imposes heavy punishment. Therefore let no man think of his neighbour's wife. As a grass blade, if badly grasped, cuts the arm, badly practiced asceticism leads to hell. An act carelessly performed, a broken vow, and hesitating obedience to discipline, all this brings no great reward. If anything is to be done, let a man do it. Let him attack it vigorously. A careless pilgrim only scatters the dust of his passions more widely. An evil deed is better left undone, for a man repents of it afterwards. A good deed is better done, for having done it, one does not repent. Like a well-guarded frontier fort, with defences within and without, so let a man guard himself. Not a moment should escape, for they who allow the right moment to pass suffer pain when they are in hell. They who are ashamed of what they ought not to be ashamed of, and are not ashamed of what they ought to be ashamed of, such men, embracing false doctrines, enter the evil path. They who fear when they ought not to fear, and fear not when they ought to fear, such men, embracing false doctrines, enter the evil path. They who forbid when there is nothing to be forbidden, and forbid not when there is something to be forbidden, such men, embracing false doctrines, enter the evil path. They who know what is forbidden as forbidden, and what is not forbidden as not forbidden, such men, embracing the true doctrine, enter the good path. Chapter 23. The Elephant. Silently shall I endure abuse, as the elephant in battle endures the arrows sent from the bow, for this world is ill-natured. They lead a tamed elephant to battle. The king mounts a tamed elephant. The tamed is the best among men, he who silently endures abuse. Mules are good if tamed, and noble Sindhu horses, and elephants with large